Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, joined with Jack Bretnall, Brian Maffei, and we are here on a Sunday morning, coming back off of a holiday weekend, big docket of college football from yesterday to cover some defensive line prospects in the NFL draft. But before we do that, Jack, it has been a few weeks. Great to have you back. How are you doing?
Yeah, good to be back. Sundays felt weird without this in my calendar, so it's nice to be back and talking football.
Yeah, and Brian, great to see you. How are you doing out on the West Coast?
It's cold, like it's been cold. At least for us, it's cold. Not really, obviously for you guys. For you guys, is really not much of anything, but
okay. Well, we're going to be going through some defensive line prospects. Some of these are the first time that the channel has covered them, so I'm definitely curious where Jack and Brian have them graded. But we're going to cover Aaron Grace from Iowa, James Smith from Alabama, Chris McClellan from Missouri, Mekart Abu-Jode from North Carolina, and I got to get the spelling corrected on the slide, Trey Moore from Texas, Cam Robertson from SMU, Isaiah Smith from SMU, Romello Height from Texas Tech, and then we're going to close it out with Max Llewellyn from Iowa. So we're going to start with Aaron Grace from Iowa. Jack, what did you think?
Yeah, so interesting player. Fourth-year senior, verified measurables, 6'4" and 5'8", 296. I thought there was some good stuff on tape. He is obviously a little bit smaller, but I think he's got a good first step that kind of helps. You want to see that from a guy who's maybe a little bit undersized. He's got that good first step. His hands are quick, and I thought they were pretty accurate as well. So you do see some kind of early wins, and he's got a nice swim move to kind of finish and get into the backfield. He's obviously a little bit taller for a defensive tackle, but I thought pad level was pretty good, actually. I thought he did a decent job of playing with leverage. I think he is the kind of slashing 3-tech at the next level. He's not a guy I want to be holding up against double teams, certainly at that size. The arm length is a concern. So he's got 30 3/4 inch arms, which is major outlier for defensive tackles. He does get washed out in the run game a fair bit, which you kind of expect for a guy of that size. And I think his pass rush plan is a little bit one-dimensional. He's a bit of a finesse type player, and you don't see an awful lot of power in his game. So I think there's a role for him. For me, he's a kind of mid-late, probably later day 3 grade. He can be a useful rotational piece if you want a guy who can get after the quarterback, but he's probably not really ever going to be a 3-down defensive lineman in my book.
And Brian, how about you on Aaron Grace from Iowa? Brian, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. Sorry. Sorry. Some similar, some different from Jack here. This is his second year as a starter. It's partially because Iowa is weird with how they start guys. They don't start underclassmen generally. But yeah, he's got a muscular build, but he's undersized, got kind of a thin lower body. He does try to get extension with his arms. They are short, like Jack said earlier. He'll play some half man. I didn't see much explosiveness off the snap, and his punch is a bit slow too as well. It's not very explosive on that either. But he does consistently give effort. Plays the whistle. You'll see him jump into piles and stuff like that. He's constantly pushing, driving his legs and stuff like that. But his feet are pretty quick. He can easily slant from one B gap all the way to the other B gap. He's got a quick swim move that he'll use against the backfield, which appears sometimes with like a little bit of a juke. And it actually was pretty effective a few times. I got a sack on Indiana on that one, actually. But has some nice short area closing speed. Solid change of direction, I would say. But kind of like what Jack was saying, he still gets pushed around a lot by blockers and stuff when they get their hands on him. sometimes he'll get late separation from them, but it'll be like a situation where the running backs past the line of scrimmage, already like 2-3 yards past the line of scrimmage, and he'll kind of break off and then tackle the running back or whatever. Double teams completely take him out of his gap and out of the play pretty much. So they completely neutralize him. But he does play with good vision. He's able to find the ball. He sets a good base in the run game. He just gets out physical, like I said, and gets taken out. He'll occasionally time the snap. Sometimes I think he times the snap up well. Occasionally, and you'll see kind of like this quick pop off the snap because he times up the snap. But it's not obviously not really consistent. It's kind of hard to do that, especially how they change up the snaps in the NFL. There's at times too, even his short arms, you see it affect him trying to even tackle like running backs or whatever players running by. Like he dives them, but like his arms are short, so he can't grasp them. So that does cause him to miss some tackles and miss out on some plays. I think his pad level could be a little bit better. It's not bad, but I think just because he's kind of a smaller guy. Obviously, he's sub 300 pounds. He's almost 6'5", basically 6'5". I think his pad level could be a little bit better just for what he's going to do in the NFL, what they're going to ask him to do, and it's going with his positives and negatives physically at least. I think that would help him. But I've seen him try to get a bull rush, but he doesn't get much movement on that. Tried a long arm to stab on that one as well, but same thing because his arms are short, he really didn't get much off of it. But as a crasher on stunts, he looks pretty good. He's not completely stiff as a pass rusher. A lot of times you'll see those defensive tackles are a little bit stiff. He's not that. He's not super bendy, obviously, but he's not completely stiff. But yeah, kind of like similar Jack, I have a mid to late day 3 pick on him. If you can maybe add a little more bulk, he could probably stay in strength and stuff. He could probably stay in the league maybe 5 to 8 years as a third down, obvious passing situation type, rotational type player. He doesn't really have any effect on the run game. It's not really athletic enough to be a starter, but I think he'd be a rotational guy that comes in on third and longs and stuff like that and gives you a little bit of a push.
So, Jack, what do you think is a better role for Aaron Graves, a 4-3-3 technique or a 3-4 defensive end?
I think he's a 3 tech. Yeah. I think he's a guy you want just kind of shooting gaps, not really holding up at the point of attack, not trying to 2-gap, just get him going into the backfield, and yeah, I think that's where he's going to be maximized in my book.
Okay. Next player, I'm going to say a similar defensive lineman in play style, but James Smith from Alabama. Brian, what do you have on James Smith?
Yeah, for Smith, he's officially listed at 6'3", 297. To me, he does look a little bit shorter than he looks probably closer to 6'2". This is his first this year. He's a junior this year. This is his first year as a starter. He's actually a former 5-star guy. One of the few 5-star guys we've talked about so far. But yeah, you can even kind of see by the picture there, he's got a thick build. His whole body looks pretty filled out. Don't have official measurements on him, but his length, I would say, is probably average-ish, like around 32 inches maybe, I'm guessing. His speed looks to be about average or just below average. Not super important with the alignment, it's just something I noticed. They line him up kind of all over. They played him at nose tackle, 1 tech, 2 tech, 3 tech, even some defensive ends, some 5 tech, stuff like that. So he moves around and he can play every up and down the line. But actually off the snap, he's pretty quick and explosive off the snap. Pretty athletic guy. I think partially from the 5-star. That's why he got the 5-star. Sometimes you even see him when he times up the snap a little bit. He just flies off the ground. And he can really penetrate in the backfield when he's 1-gapping. I think kind of an issue though there with that is Alabama has their guys a lot of do cap and stop and read, and that stuff I think it hurts his effectiveness and his ability to affect the game. But he does get turned and pushed around by blockers. He does need to develop a stronger base. His upper body at least physically is strong. At times his technique is off, but at least he's got a strong upper body. Especially if he can get his hands under the armpit of the blocker. I've seen him a number of times torque them and dump them on the ground. But again, there's just flashes of it. It's not consistent enough. Not at all, really. He'll get ran out of his gap, like I said. But despite his build, he will get pushed around in the run game by physical, strong blockers. So something he's going to need to work on. Single blockers can handle him at times, even when he's 2-gapping. But he does have a swim move. It needs some work. It's a bit slow. His timing was off and stuff like that. But there's a couple of times flashed. It looked nice, but most of the time it was kind of slow and the timing was off. At times I noticed he tries to freelance a little bit. He'll leave his gap and try and make a play. And then the running back will cut back and go through his gap that he just left, basically. He's tried to spin move, but it didn't look very good. I don't think it's anything that's going to be a good idea for him to develop more or keep doing it. It just didn't look slow. It didn't look quick. I think at times his football intelligence can be a little questionable. Him recognizing plays and understanding what the offense is doing and where the play is going, I think can be there's a little bit of delay there. There's a little tick late. But he does have flashes of reading it well, and especially in the run game. But at times he's still too even, like he's trying to take up blockers with his shoulder. He's even at times had smaller tight ends just take him out of the play. And then he'll even get shoulders over his feet sometimes, and he'll get snatch trapped to the ground. But he's shown flashes of being able to play half man. But really the pass rush and block deconstruction game is really undeveloped in his skill set. He has talent. He probably just needs another year or two, even though he has one more year left. But I think if he came out today, he's probably like a mid-day 3 pick.
Okay. Jack, what did you think of James Smith?
I think Brian and I see him really similarly, to be honest. I think he is more flash than consistency, is the way I'd put it. There are plays where you see him and you think, yeah, I can see the 5-star background. I think he's, smooth athlete, moves pretty well. There are flashes of quick and efficient hands. I don't think it's consistent, though. Again, you see occasions where he'll convert speed to power. Not very consistently, but you see that he can do it. As Brian mentioned, plays from a range of alignments. There's a good bit of versatility there. I think, the limited experience is a big one. I think he's got less than 700 career snaps at this point. Pass rush plan is very raw, underdeveloped. Snap timing, I saw a bit of inconsistency there. And again, the size, it's not necessarily a major problem, but he is on the smaller side. So given that he's a true junior, I think for me, he'd be a back-to-school type player. I think another year of starting experience, getting those reps under his belt, developing his technique is definitely what's best for him in the long run.
Okay. Next player, Chris McClellan from Missouri, 6'4", 323 is what PFF had. Jack, what did you think of the Missouri defensive tackle?
Yeah, I quite liked him actually. So I've got verified measurables on him: 6'2" and 7/8 and 317 with 33 and 3/8 inch arms. So pretty good size. I think that shows on tape. You see good functional strength. I think has a good first step for a player of his size. I don't think it's great by any stretch, but for his size, I think it's good. The hands that you see there are a bit quick, active. I thought they were really accurate. I think he does a really nice job of kind of getting inside the chest and winning first contact, which I think is always really important for kind of controlling blocks, both as a pass rusher and as a run defender. And he is a high effort player. You see a real kind of hot motor. You see a lot of fight kind of to and through the whistle. So there's a lot there that I think to bet on. I think the physical tools are NFL caliber. You've got the ability to kind of impact all 3 downs. I think he can be a good kind of balanced 3 tech at the next level. I think there's definitely room for improvement, though. I think at the moment he's probably more toolsy than he is polished for me. He has a really good swim move, which he uses well as a pass rusher, but I think that's kind of like clearly his go-to, and he's a little bit over-reliant on it at the moment. And you'd like to see him add 1 or 2 kind of alternatives. I think he's a little bit predictable when it comes to that. He's not the best against double teams. You'd like to think for someone at, I'd say 317, you'd be able to hold up more consistently, but there are a number of times where you just see him completely getting washed out there. I think part of that is because of kind of inconsistency with pad level. You definitely see that come up with a pass rusher as well. And I think, that lack of a polished counter is probably the thing that I would say he needs to work on most. So I think the tools are there. For me, I've got an early day 3 grade on him. So I think there's definitely something to work with from a kind of NFL perspective. But there's just a bit more polish needed.
Hey, and Brian, where were you on the Missouri defensive tackle, Chris McClellan?
Yeah, I agree with a lot, kind of what Jack was saying. Again, kind of some couple things different, but most of what Jack was saying. Yeah, so just a couple other just interesting background things on him. I always like to start with the background stuff. This is his second year as a starter. He actually transferred over from Florida, where he was a backup for his first 2 years. Another interesting thing too was his official measurements on his hands. He has 11 and 1/8 inch hands, so he's got some big old hands, and they definitely show up on film. Also, on that 317 as official weight, he was heavier last year. I don't remember offhand. I don't remember offhand the exact weight it was, but there was some official measurements on it. He was like in the 330s, and he does look more. A little more athletic this year, a little more explosive this year off the snap at the lower weight. So I think the weight loss was good for him. But again, onto the film. So he has very little fat on his body. That arm length, that 33 and 3 inches arms do show up on film. As a pass rusher, I've seen him show a little bit of a rip, but it could be better. Although on the interior, they don't use rips super often, but still it could be better if he's going to use it. Gets good extensions on his arms. He sets a wide base. He will get over his shoulders, over his feet a little bit sometimes, and I haven't seen it cause too much an issue as far as guys putting on the ground. But I think NFL offensive linemen will take advantage of that, of course. But he'll use the bull rush, would get some decent movement, but it's not like a go-to move, I would say. It could be improved, of course, but at least right now I would say that. He does have some versatility. They've played him anywhere from basically 0 tech to like 4 tech. You're not going to see him play 5 tech or anything like that, but along the interior, but at least he can play them down. I would say his change of direction, though, is a little bit below average. And I've seen blockers use his momentum against him at times when he's rushing up the field, and they basically use his momentum against him and just like kind of keep him going the one way and just out of the play, basically, or he doesn't affect the quarterback or the running back or what have you. But, he does have some decent movement skills to work outside of the phone booth. His base can get a little thin at times, get a push from the side, and but he does show he can get off blocks and pursue plays down the line. He does some good speed and explosiveness to do that. That's kind of like what Jack said. He has trouble holding up the double teams, and he'll get pushed out of his gap. But when they use him as like a looper on stunts and stuff, he looks pretty good doing that. I think because of his explosiveness and stuff like that. And but again, his lack of change of direction does still show up. But if he's going against a single blocker in the run game, he does okay. He can kind of hold up there. But again, he's not like defeating them too much. He's not getting much push. He's just kind of holding up, so to speak. But I've seen flashes of him being play some half man, cross faces, disengage and attack the run game. He just needs to do it more consistently. Gets pushed around. He's showing flashes of stacking and shedding, but again, not consistent with that either. But I kind of like to throw out a little a shoulder head fake with a as a pass rusher sometimes, and a couple guys kind of fell for that a little bit. I saw him also do a club rip, but that wasn't good enough yet. The club was kind of lacking a little bit of power to it. So if we can get that a little more power into the rip, I think that could be a little bit of a move you can use too. But again, he shows some good initial quickness off the snap. As far as a NFL player, I think he actually has a little bit of TJ Slayton to his game. He's not as big, and I think he has a little more pass rush upside / potential, whatever you want to call it. But I think he'll probably go in the same range around the 5th round, and he could develop into a starter if everything goes right.
Okay. So I find it refreshing when both of you have very similar grades, right? Where you're saying early day 3 kind of thing. So love that. Okay. So Brian, I think this was a player that you brought to my attention.
Yep.
Melkart Abu Jaoud from North Carolina. Did I say that well?
I believe so. I haven't got around to looking into the right pronunciation of a lot of names at this time of year. I'm not there yet.
Yes. What did you have on the North Carolina edge?
Yeah, he's an interesting player. I came upon actually last year when he was at Delaware last few years, I should say. But yeah, I found him last year at Delaware. He had, I want to say 9 sacks last year at Delaware. So the guy kind of popped on film a little bit, but I hadn't done a deep dive on him. but I add him to my database because, like I said, he popped up film a little bit. But so yeah, he's a redshirt junior, listed at 6'5", 260. This year is his second year as a starter. I would say, as far as the film, I would say he looks pretty close to his listed size. He looks pretty big, dude. He's definitely one of the bigger edge rushers you'll find in this class if he comes out. I think his length looks really good too. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in that 33 to 34 inch arm range. Really well built, muscular. His physicality definitely translates into the run game. But funny weird thing I did notice when he's coming off the snap, his arms kind of swing a bit wild, kind of like all over the place. I don't know what he's thinking, like he's in a track meet or something. But yeah, his arms kind of all over the place. I think he needs to kind of clean that up and tighten those up. But yeah, his closing speed is there. He's got a good rip move and can work outside the edge. They did play him mostly in a 2-point stance. I think in NFL, you'd want to probably see more of a 3-point stance, like in a 4-3, when he can build momentum and stuff like that. Or when he can build momentum, he's hard to stop. He brings power with him when he's doing that, speed to power. Holds up well in the run game. He keeps his legs working. Has good grip strength, but I think his ability to reset his hands and kind of rework his hands, I think that needs some work. He'll use the speed to power, like I said. He gets a good push on it. He has a club, but timing on that's a little bit too off. And then he also uses a swipe, but he does that a little too soon. His pad level starts off good during plays, but it sometimes it starts to rise as the play goes on sometimes. So he needs to keep his pad level down on that. North Carolina asked him to drop and like the zone cover type stuff, but he didn't look right doing it. He didn't look comfortable doing it. I don't think he's that guy that feels comfortable, at least physically, going backwards. So I don't think it's something you're really going to ask him to do in the NFL. Let's see what else. Sorry, all my space in my notes. He'll cross face and has explosiveness and physicality to be a good TE looper. Has some nice long arm that he doesn't. I feel like he should use it more. But he does have a little bit of bend to his game, not super bendy or not great, but there's a little bit there. He has a second gear though when chasing down plays. So I think when he goes to the combine, whether it's this year or next year, he'll run I think he should run pretty fast in the 40. But he does have trouble defeating blockers in the run game. He mostly just kind of holds his gap. He'll throw a shoulder into blockers when they're coming at him, when they're looping around, or not looping, they're pulling on him. He needs to learn how to kind of more stack them and shed them. He's played half man in the run game. He plays a lot of snaps, though. They rarely comes out. That's obviously a positive. But my thoughts were despite this 3-week run he had recently where he had 9 sacks in 3 games, I think if he should probably go back to school, he needs to play the run better, improve his pass rusher, and use his hands more to get off blocks. There is obviously pass rush potential in him. But I think if he did come out early, I think if any good workouts, I think he could go early day 3.
Okay, and Jack, what did you think of the North Carolina edge?
Yeah, well, if it was Brian who suggested him, then I suppose I should say thanks to Brian because I really enjoyed his tape. Yeah, he was an interesting watch to me. I think I see him fairly similarly to Brian in terms of the range. I think there are some things I think he does better than Brian does, but I think there's also areas where I think he's weaker. But we end up with a kind of evaluation at the end of the day. So I think, yeah, the size, the length, the strength, I think all of those are NFL ready. I thought he was a good run defender. I love how he takes on pullers. Like, it's a small thing, but like when you see an edge who like just like throws himself at pullers, it's great. And it's just kind of that the competitive toughness you want to see, especially from a guy that size. I think, yeah, it's solid run defender. I think you can depend on him to set the edge on early downs. I think his hands, are probably the best part about his game. I think you see him time his moves well. I think the placement is good. I think he's got pop. Like when he does hit those guys and he gets the long arm or the bull rush, you see it. I think I watched one of the games I watched was the Clemson game, and you saw him a couple of times testing Blake Miller's anchor. And Blake Miller's obviously getting quite a lot of buzz as a prospect. So I think seeing him do it against that level of competition was really good. I actually probably thought that was the best game of his I watched, which is funny because I can't remember if he did have a sack in that one, but it certainly wasn't one of the ones where he had 3 sacks. But it was good to see him playing well against kind of top level competition. I think he's he's smart as well. Like, I like how he reads the run. You see him, especially when teams will run kind of counter or power. You see him quickly read the pullers and adjust his path, and kind of, he's not one of those guys who will run himself out of plays. Now, limitations wise, I think I really like him, and I think his tape's really good. I think for me, I just think there's an athletic ceiling there, and he's kind of probably fairly close to his ceiling. I don't really see much in the way of burst. It did look like Brian mentioned he's used a lot in a 2-point stance. I think he, as Brian said, he looks a lot better when he's kind of hand in the dirt 3-point stance, and I think he's best fitting in a 4-3 for that reason. I don't think he's going to be an outside track rusher really at the next level, but I think you can get away with that as long as you've got power and a good inside move. He did show an inside spin move occasionally, which was, I wasn't expecting for a guy that size, but it did work a couple of times. I think, yeah, Brian mentioned pad level sometimes can be a challenge, and I think the longer he gets into the rush, the more he kind of gets upright. I think he's a little stiff. So I think as long as you don't mind a guy who's maybe a bit limited athletically in terms of a bit stiffness and a bit of kind of limited burst, then I think he can be a really useful player. But I think, yeah, definitely a guy I like. For me, I've got him as a kind of top end of round 4.
Okay, and then very interesting that Google has played some tricks on my slides. That was really funny to see that disappear. My computer right now is having a mind of its own.
Uh-oh.
Wow. Okay, we're closing that window.
You just muted yourself.
Yeah, like something's taken over my computer. That was fascinating. So, are we still here? Okay,
yeah.
We are still here. Okay, so the next player, I don't have the slide up. I'll be pulling it up here in a minute. Brian, do you have the next player I had in order?
Yeah, Trey Moore.
Go ahead and do Trey Moore while I pull up the slides.
Yeah, Trey Moore, Texas. He transferred over from UTSA last year. We have this is his 3rd year as a starter. We have what's it called? Verified measurements on him: 6'1" and 4/8, so 6'1 and a half. 246 with 32 and 3/8 inch arms. So a little bit shorter arms, but he's got some good big hands at 10.5 inches. But this year, he's not technically starting this year. He started 4 games, but most of the season he hasn't started this year, so he's kind of technically a backup this year. Okay. Sorry, I was reading my notes. I was like, what does that mean? Yeah, so he likes to use his length, even though doesn't have great length. He likes to use his arms. His frame looks pretty filled out. He's a good athlete, and that shows on film. It actually shows a nice spin move, but his getting off blocks and block deconstruction needs a lot of work. Has trouble sometimes even getting off tight ends. He'll get pushed around in the run game, gets ridden completely out of plays at times. He has a stutter step, juke, bull rush, long arm, and a stab. His power moves seem to be a little bit more effective, and his big hands do show up on film. Those power moves being more effective is kind of might be an issue with the NFL just because he's a smaller edge rusher. But he does show flashes of the power. Some wasted motions off the snap at times. I noticed he'll drop his back foot on the snap and then go forward. So he's wasting motion. He's losing explosiveness on there. But he does seem to basically run into a wall at times when he's playing the run. He just basically a lot of times he'll just stop when he hits the blocker. And at times Texas has asked him to zone drop, but he looks okay going backwards and moving around side to side and doing stuff. So I think it's something he can do in the NFL if the team wants him to. But I think they asked him, like Texas, I should say, at least asked him to do a little more than they should. But he can be really explosive off the snap when he's able to just pin his ear backs and rush up the field. He has a rip move, but it's not that effective. I haven't noticed him showing any counters yet, or any stringing any moves together yet. And he does rely on his spin a little bit too much, where NFL tackles will just end up sitting on it because he just uses it all the time. But shows good pursuit and closing speed when he's tracking down a quarterback or a running back or something like that from the backside. He will throw a shoulder into blockers. He's got some decent ankle flexion on on slower moving tackles. It's not great. It's nothing special, but it's decent. I would say it's not a negative. He uses a club and spin, which looks pretty good actually. I think it's kind of his best move so far. But he does get good leverage as a rusher. He gets under blockers' pads, of course, because he's under 6'2", and has thrown out a ghost move at times, which hasn't shown, or I should say, hasn't shown to be very good right now. But I think there's potential to be pretty good because he's short, he's lower to ground, so it's easier for him to kind of duck under those blockers' pads. But they even off at times in this season. Actually, they even line him up as like almost like an off-ball linebacker, which again I think is a bad idea. He's not an off-ball linebacker. But as a linebacker, at least he looked okay doing it, like in his stance against the run game and stuff like that. But as far as his projection, I think he's likely a DPR at the next level just because of his size, his average / below average length, his play against the run. He still has some growth potential as a rusher, of course. You can find out, file down those moves a little better, get a little better, a little refined. But I have him as depending on how he works out and how he does like some all-star games or what have you, if he does go in as a mid to late day 3 project.
Okay. So, Brian, I'm glad that you brought up the linebacker edge paradigm with Trey Moore. So, funny story, I had him with the linebacker group. And then, James Foster, Sam Teets get a hold of the list. And they agreed to it initially. And then they get to the week where they're doing Trey Moore. And they said, we're not doing Trey Moore with linebackers. So him and Jay-Sean Barham seem to be kind of in the same category where they played some linebacker earlier in their college career. And then somehow with scouting reports, everybody's telling me to group them with edges. So Jack, Trey Moore, edge or linebacker, and what do you think of the player?
I think so. Looking at my notes, I think if you're being charitable and you're being nice, you call him a hybrid. If you're being less charitable, he's a tweener. I think for me, the good stuff is, as Brian mentioned, like the athleticism is good. He's loose, he's flexible. I thought he looked decent for an edge, certainly for an edge when dropping kind of into space. Now, if you're kind of looking at that through a linebacker lens, then there's not a lot there. But in terms of purely the movement skills rather than the instincts, I think he's comfortable doing that. I think the motor there is great. I think you see him kind of finish plays a lot of the time just from hustle. He's got loads of experience. So he's got over 2,300 snaps in college. So one of the most experienced defensive linemen in the class. 4 years of starting experience. I think the last couple of games he's actually played almost entirely off ball, whereas the games I watched he was primarily playing kind of off the edge. I think the thing that kind of concerns me with him, and this is where I think he's probably one of the guys who is very landing spot specific. He's not big enough for me in terms of size. Maybe it's not so much size. I mean, he is smaller, but it's not like prohibitive size. But he's not got great size to play permanently on the edge. And I don't think he's going to be a guy who can set the edge in run defense. I just don't think that's there. I think Brian mentioned, like, one of the notes I had, pass rush plan, really varied, but there's not really necessarily a go-to that is like consistently winning. And I think it's always good to see a guy who's got a number of ways to win, but like one of them needs to be a reliable move. And I don't see that from his tape. I don't think he's great at kind of controlling blocks and stacking and shedding. So a lot of this is making you think he's not going to be playing permanently as an edge. But then equally, I don't think he's got the linebacker instincts. When you do see him try and fit the run as an off-ball linebacker, it's a little mixed. Gap integrity is not the best. So I think he could be a useful depth piece in a front that wants to get creative, wants to use sim pressures, is willing to kind of run like fire zones and drop guys. But that's not every team. So I think he can be useful in that kind of scheme. But I think he kind of just needs to find a role, because at the moment he feels like one of those players who is kind of between two roles for me, which is always tricky when you're projecting that to the NFL.
So, Jack, as I'm listening to you, I think he's a Philadelphia Eagle in round 6 or 7.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. That or a Viking under Brian Flores, something like that.
Yep. So appreciate that insight. Another player that came on to the scouting reports list late was Cam Robertson from SMU. So we did several SMU game previews. Nobody mentioned him. He was not mentioned during summer scouting, but this is the second time the channel's covered him. He got reasonably good evals and scouting reports the first time. But Jack, what did you think of Cam Robertson from SMU?
Yeah, so I've got verified measurables on him. I've got 6'3" and 5'8", 255 pounds, 32-inch arms, so smaller than you'd like in terms of length. He's got some decent production this year. I think he's at 34 pressures, 6 sacks, so some nice kind of backfield production. I think hands are quick, they're active. You see him fighting through the rep. He's going to be one of those guys who will just show good motor and kind of keep hand fighting until the whistle. He's got a decent anchor. When you ask him to set the edge against the run, I think he's capable of doing that. I think bend is decent enough. I don't think it's great, but I think it's kind of passable. I think his pursuit speed is really good. I see some good kind of closing speed from him. So I think he's the kind of guy who's going to win with, technique more than he is maybe tools. The arm length is obviously a concern. There's not many guys who are consistent difference makers in the NFL with 32-inch arms. I'd like to see him win a little more with power or inside moves. A lot of the wins I saw from him, or at least a lot of the kind of attempts I saw from him as a pass rusher, were trying to win as an outside track rusher. He can do that, but I think he needs to add a little bit more variety, because otherwise tackles in the NFL will just kind of sit on that. And I don't think he's like a hyper elite athlete that can get by with that as a plan. I'd like to see a little bit more pop. Like at that kind of size, I'd be expecting maybe more power, but I didn't see him. You saw a few times where he would get a bit of initial knockback, but I didn't see it sustain into kind of collapsing the pocket. And I don't see him controlling blocks in the run game brilliantly. Again, it's passable, but like he won't get moved, but he's not a guy who's going to, toss guys aside and kind of control the rep. So I think part of that is the length limitations there. So I think for me, he kind of comes in midday 3. I think he can add value as a kind of outside track rusher, but I think those short arms and limited power are just going to limit the ceiling a little bit. But I think there's an NFL role there. I just don't think it's a high-end one.
Do you have Cam Robertson higher than Trey Moore, Jack?
I do. Yes, I do. Robertson is my 25th ranked edge and Moore is 30th.
Got it. So, Brian, where are you on Cam Robertson from SMU?
Yeah, again with all the guys so far. I agree mostly with what Jack's saying. There's a few things I disagree with. I mean, it's mostly I agree. So yeah, as far as Cam Robinson, just quick background things. This year is his first year as a starter. He was a backup every year. Besides that, obviously he actually is a North Texas transfer. So he transferred from North Texas a couple of years ago. And this season he did miss 3 games with an injury. I wasn't able to find out what the exact injury was. I think it was a lower body, but I can't remember. I couldn't find anything for sure. But yeah, he's got a solid build. It looks like he could put on a few more pounds if he wanted to, but he's pretty. I think he's pretty filled out for the most part. Something weird I noticed on film too is just watching me. It looks like his length is better than the verified number we have. That 32. It doesn't look like 32. It doesn't look super long, but I think he looks closer to 33 to me. So I wouldn't be surprised if he once it goes to combine and all that stuff measured out, he measures out a little bit longer. Yeah, I feel like his long speed is kind of lacking. Again, not super performant edge rushers, but it's still something I noticed on this film. Overall, his athleticism looks kind of be be like kind of just above average-ish, but just above average, I guess, or a little above average. Doesn't look to have much bend, has a little bit, but not a lot. He can dip a little bit. I saw him on a few times use a dip and a rip actually, but it wasn't super effective. He was able to get some pressure on it, but I don't know how effective that's gonna be next level because again he's not super bendy. But he can show he's shown he can counter a little bit. There's a few times on film I noticed he went. I forget who it was against, but he went hard on the outside and tried to use a swipe. It didn't work, and he countered back inside with a swim. That didn't end up working either, but it's still something you see on film. If you see it on film, it's something that it's actually you wouldn't normally mark it down as a positive just because you're seeing the process there. You're seeing him working through things. You're seeing him in real time realizing, okay, this first move didn't work. Let me counter back with this other move. So that's obviously a positive, even though he didn't get a pressure or sack or anything like that, or he didn't even beat the blocker. It's something that can be refined and continue to work on and stuff like that to improve those moves. But the fact that he's at the higher level is thinking as far as pass rushing, as far as thinking counters and stuff like that, is impressive at least. But he can cross face. I saw him he even used a stab, and on the play, I think he started off with his left hand, and then in the middle of the play, he switched over to his right hand with his stab. So that was kind of impressive too. You don't see that very often. Usually the guy does a stab and he just kind of sticks with it and just pushes away into the backfield if he can. But he does like to use his hands a lot. His accuracy with his hands, his shooting his hands is generally pretty good. A couple times it's off here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And generally, I felt like he held up okay in the run game. He could play some edge contain and play some half man and stuff like that. But again, he's not going to be beating blockers up in the run game or anything like that. But he's going to hold his gap for the most part. He does a good job of finding the ball and trying to make a play on it. And he's even strong enough at times to, while he's getting blocked by, like, say, a tight end or something like that, he's able to still kind of reach out one arm and grab like a running back or a quarterback or whatever is going by. He's using swim, and it's kind of solid. I wouldn't say it's great or elite. I think it's pretty solid, I would say. And at times I use him as a stunner, and he looks like he's too fast, too quick for some interior offensive linemen. He uses a little bit of speed to power, but not as much as I would like. I think he could use a little bit more. There's another time that I saw on film. I put a note in my notes. He did a double swim. He swam. I think it was the guard, and then he switched over to the other swim on the center with the other arm, or something like that. But it's pretty impressive too, because especially being able to switch arms like that and swim back to back. Does show a starter step and juke. But I felt like he did a little bit too much. If you guys know what I'm talking about, like a little bit of twinkle toes with that, his feet were like that, a little too quick. He does show some flashes of being able to stack and shed. He's also aware when blockers get a little over their toes and you use a push pull on them. He tries to do Euro step a few times, but it was just kind of okay looking. It wasn't great. If he wants to continue to use that, I think it obviously needs to be improved. But, at times, and even the run game, at times he can still be inconsistent. I saw him times get taken out by tight ends. His pad level can get a little high sometimes. But he works hard. He's aggressive on the play, even when he's a backside defender even. He can chase down running backs again in the backfield. I feel like his ability to close out plays needs to improve, be able to finish plays needs to improve. He'll get in the backfield, he'll get pressures and whatever, but just being able to finish needs to improve. But as far as a whole, if he feels like he has a good bag of pass rush tricks, there just needs a little more refinement with those. I think there's still a little bit upside left with him as far as developing as a pass rusher. I think if he reaches his ceiling, he could be a solid rotational edge rusher, and I have a mid day 3 pick on him.
Okay. So there's a question in the chat. I'm going to get to it in a second. Jack, when you were saying that, I think you said Robertson was edge 25 and Moore was edge 30. Did I hear that right?
Yep.
So that should speak volumes that you have a draftable grade on edge 30. Like,
well, it's borderline, but yeah. Right,
but I agree, borderline. But that does speak to the depth of the group. And that stuck out, right? Because about 52 defensive linemen get drafted every year between defensive tackle and edge. And if we're at, a draftable grade on Robertson at edge 25, and then Moore is fringe at edge 30, that's one of the reasons that we do the podcast the way that we do them, is to try to sort through like what the depth of the class is. So Anthony has a question for Jack, and then he has a follow-up question a little bit further down. So Jack, do you think Robertson is a 3-4 outside linebacker or a 4-3 hand in the dirt edge?
I think he's probably more of a 3-4 guy. I think I know the size maybe looks a bit more like a 4-3, but I think that kind of outside track technical guy that's solid-ish against the run but not great, I'd probably prefer him there. But I don't think he's one of those guys where I'm like, he is one or the other. Whereas like some of the guys that, and we may come on to in a bit, are definitely one or the other. I think he could probably do a bit of both.
Okay. And then, yeah, and I think the second question was similar. So we'll move to Isaiah Smith. I'm going to say he's the other SMU edge, 6'4", 248. We've covered him once before, but Jack, what did you think of Isaiah Smith?
Yeah, so this is one of the guys who I think is probably a kind of 3-4 rather than a 4-3 guy. So one of the things I said about his teammate was that he's 255 pounds, but he doesn't necessarily always play like you'd expect. Smith at 248 is kind of what you would expect, or at least I do, from a sub 250 edge. I think the explosiveness is good. I think first step is good. I think he bends well. I think you see him kind of maintain his speed when working as a kind of high side rusher. I think he can flatten and close on the quarterback. So I think, again, I think he was in the Clemson game. You saw him beat Blake Miller for a sack as a kind of outside rusher, which, given how athletic Miller is, I think that speaks to Smith's ability as a high side rusher. I think the best part about his game for me was I thought he was really good on stunts, especially as a looper. He's fluid but quick as well, so you kind of see him being able to maintain his speed while looping and changing direction, which I think if you're a team who wants to run a bunch of stunts, I think he'll be a great addition there. He is, I suppose, a little shorter than average at 6'4", and I think you see that in terms of how he plays with leverage. So he does get kind of up and under pads, and you see him win that way. I think as far as limitations go, again, these are probably what you would expect for a guy of that size. I think functional strength is poor. You see him try and work power occasionally, but it doesn't really ever go anywhere, and certainly doesn't sustain. And if that's the case in college, you're not going to win with power in the NFL. I don't think his hands are very well refined. Like I say, he wins with athleticism, but I think his timing and placement are off. The amount of times where you just kind of see him end up like body to body with the tackle was a little concerning. I don't think he's going to set the edge very well. He's going to get moved. I watched one of the other games I watched was the Miami game, and you saw him kind of getting torqued, moved out of his gap. One of them was by a tight end, which I think, again, if that's happening in college against a college tight end, then what does that say for the NFL projection? So I think he's got a really clear and specific role at the pro level. I think he is a kind of high side speed rusher who wins with quickness, but I don't think he's going to be an every down guy. I think there's enough reason to think he can develop because the tools are there. I just don't think he's very technically refined at the moment. So I have him actually ranked ever so slightly lower than Robertson, even if I feel like he's got quite a clean role projection, just because I think that he is more of a pass rush specialist than a guy who could evolve into a 3-down defensive lineman.
Jake, do you see special teams upside with Isaiah Smith?
I think potentially. I don't know if he's played. I don't think when I looked, he played a ton of special teams in college, but I think the traits are there. So that's probably, I think, certainly the level he's going to get drafted in terms of, for me, it'd probably be kind of late day 3. You're going to need to be able to play special teams to stick on a roster. So I think he probably could, but he's not done it a ton in his career so far, certainly from what I remember.
Okay. Brian, what do you have on Isaiah Smith from SMU?
Yeah. So he's a 1 year. This is his first year as a starter, so a 1 year starter. He's got a good build. His body looks pretty muscular and filled out. He's even got muscular calves and arms. He's got a thin waist. I think his length looks pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if he's over 33, if he's close to 34. He's got really nice explosiveness off the snap. He's athletic. He can play backside and play it aggressively. He can really get up the arc and has some really nice bend off the edge. It makes it hard for blockers just kind of right around the pocket because he can kind of come around and cut back up, or even slip them. But he does need to develop some counters when that happens, or tackles overset him. I think that's something that's going to take his game to the next level if he can develop some counters. I feel like he has a little more pop in his hands than you would think a guy who's sub 250 does. It's not great or anything special, anything like that. But I think it's a little bit more. You see a few times here and there him pop a guy with his hands and gets a little bit of a shock out of him. Yeah, again, like I said, it's not special, but I feel like it's a little bit more than you expect of a guy at his size. His change of direction is really good. He can stop on a dime and change direction. I do disagree a little bit with Jack as far as his length, as far as how he uses it. I think he uses it pretty decent. Obviously, of course, can be better. But I feel like he can contain the edge at times. But he also uses it to his length to separate and try to get free. But again, needs to work on stacking and shitting, blocking, deconstruction, all that type of stuff. And resetting his hands and all that stuff. But I did notice he doesn't seem to sometimes have much of a game plan as far as his pass rush. But he has shown like a single moves a lot of times. So he's shown a juke. But kind of like Robinson, he does a little bit of twinkle toes where his feet are too far to get too close together, so where it's nobody's going to bite on it. So he needs to try spreading his legs out a little bit, selling a little more. Maybe even have a shoulder and head bob. But he does have some natural instincts at times. He noticed some trick plays at times. Has shown flashes of being able to hold the edge. He does generate a little bit of speed to power with his stab. He has a rip. But he does need to get his pass rush set sooner. Sometimes he goes, engages with the blocker, then like hangs onto there for like a tick, and then starts trying to do his moves. But he can work his way down the line of scrimmage and tackle a back with arms while being blocked. At times I saw that. He can sells a hard outside fake, but he'll start off well with his pass rush game, with his speed and explosiveness, stuff like that, and his bend. But just like I said, there's no counters, no stringing moves together. No stringing moves together. His pass rush plan, game plan needs to work, of course, like I said. But I think he's a mid to early day 3 pick. I think if he goes the combine, has kind of freaky workout, shows up at like 255 or something like that, I think he could possibly move up into late day 2 if a team falls in love with him. But I think likely, mid to early day 2 pick.
Okay. And then finishing, we have 2 players who I think we're going to be hearing a lot about. The first of which is Romello Height from Texas Tech. Brian, do you think he's an edge or outside linebacker at the NFL level? And then what is your scouting report?
I don't know what this guy. I think 3-4 outside linebacker is going to have to be because he's so small. So we have verified measurements on him: 6'2" and 2/8. So basically 6'2" and a quarter, 228 with 32 and a quarter inch arms. So he's on the smaller side with arm length is not great either. So that's something that's obviously right away. It's the first red flag. It's a big worry. He's sub 230. But as far as the background stuff, he does have some interesting background. He is actually on his 4th school right now. So he started out at Auburn, and then he went to USC, then he went to Georgia Tech, and now he's at Texas Tech. So he's bounced around a bit here. And this is only his 2nd year as a starter. But again, like I said, he's an undersized edge rusher with a thin frame. His frame looks like he could put on a little bit more weight, but I don't think a lot, maybe 10 more pounds, something like that at most. So you're looking at a guy that's 238, so he's still pretty small. His tackling can be inconsistent. He's not much of a hitter. As I've a few times him popping the quarterback on pass rushes. He does have quick feet. His change of direction is pretty good. He'll try to use his arms and his length, but it again is lacking, so it doesn't get much. He doesn't get much advantage from it. At times, they'll use him as like an outside linebacker, like an off-ball linebacker, and he looks like he can do it. He looks okay doing it. I wouldn't call him just an off-ball linebacker, but I think it's something you're gonna have to do in the NFL with him. You're gonna have to move him around, do different stuff with him. So I think you have to use him sometimes as an outside linebacker just to throw some out there. But he does have really nice outside feint where he'll even use his shoulders and his head fake, and then he'll cut back inside where the quarterback will, or not the quarterback. The offensive tackle will bite on it and jump outside, and he'll cut back inside. But he'll even pair that with a spin. So he'll do that fake, and he'll come back around, and then he'll spin back to the inside. And then the blockers will fall for it because he goes outside so much. So he's explosive he's really explosive off the snap. He can fly off the snap into the backfield, especially the blocker whiffs or they don't block him at all. But again, his lack of size does show up when blockers get their hands on him. He's basically stopped in his track and can't go anywhere. He'll throw his shoulder into blockers at times, basically taking him out of the play just because of his lack of size. He is athletic and can drop into coverage. I even saw on some snaps they dropped him into coverage and man coverage, and he looked okay doing it. And I actually saw him flash a ghost move, which I think is something he's going to have to really work on with that, as far as especially being a smaller guy. But, the timing's off and that type of stuff. And then he can dip and rip, of course. He has some really nice bend. I would say in the upper range. Not super freaky bend, but it's up there. Comes out the snap low when he's asked to line up at 3-point stance. But again, he still gets shoved around in the run game. He continues to work and give effort, but he's basically done for. He can be a dangerous backside defender if he's left unblocked. He can be a little bit of a slippery pass rusher too. Of course, that's kind of his game anyway. Blockers deconstruction basically doesn't exist. He gets stuck on the blockers in the run game. He'll over pursue and end up taking himself out of play sometimes. He'll get knocked off track as a rusher if blockers are able to hit him or get a hand on him or push on him or something like that. He's not a very good on stunts because when he's coming on as a looper on stunts, he gets basically taken out of the play just because he's so small. The guard just puts a little hand out and just knocks him off, and he's basically done. But he's flashed a swim, and I think his game is it's completely based off his athleticism and finesse pass rush moves. His lack of bulk and strength is really concerning at the NFL level. The question is, of course, can he add enough weight without sacrificing athleticism, which I don't know if he can. And he's probably still too small to even be used as like a stack linebacker than have him rush on the passer on the third downs. I have a mid-day 3 pick on him that he could play special teams, end up being like a 4th, maybe 5th edge rusher.
Okay. Jack, Romello Height, edge linebacker. What do you think?
So I think Brian and I see him fairly similarly. There's one area where I think we disagree. I think I'm also higher in terms of where I'd have him ranked as well. I think Brian kind of summed him up really well in terms of where his strengths and weaknesses are. I think if you've got a guy who's this small, they need to be technically refined. And I do see a number of good moves. The first step is great. I think he can win, kind of like Brian said, a dip and rip. He's got a really nice kind of double hand swipe that works really well to kind of clear blockers' hands. And I think you see counters. Brian mentioned the ghost move. He's got a nice inside spin as well. So you do see him kind of understand how to set guys up when in different ways. He doesn't have a power dimension to his pass rush, as you would expect for a guy who's built like that. There were times when I was watching him where I thought he looked almost more like a safety. Like his lower half is like so. I don't think I've ever seen an edge with like a lower. His legs almost look like mine, and that's not a compliment. Like it's a weird build. I think I actually, where I disagree with Brian, I thought he was really good on stunts, but as a looper, he's not going to be a crasher. I think he's a good looper. Agree in the sense that if a guard can get over to him, then they will overwhelm him. But there was a number of reps, especially if you go and watch the Kansas game, where he was just feasting on TE stunts, like just getting free all the time, and the speed and ability to maintain that quickness. One of the things they also did in that game that they've not done a lot of, but I can see it being more of a thing at the NFL level, is they kind of then they got him and then would do that kind of radar thing where they would kind of have him start on the line, then move off ball, and then blitz as effectively as an off ball linebacker. I think the frame is an obvious concern. I think if you're trying to sell yourself on him in terms of the frame, so I have seen some reports that say he's playing in the 230s this year, which is still small, but it's better than 228. I suppose if you're trying to sell yourself, you'd be looking at like a Hassan Reddick kind of thing, because he was smaller. He was 237, I think, when he was at the combine, and he has shorter arms, but he's also quick, explosive. I think that's obviously the upper echelon of what he could be. I don't think that's a realistic comp or a fair comp. For me, he's a DPR if you are a more traditional team who needs a designated pass rusher, or he is a kind of hybrid edge that, like I said, would train more, but I think definitely a better version where you can move him around the front, kind of exploit mismatches, and kind of get him. He's comfortable dropping, he's comfortable rushing. The kind of team where you just want to keep quarterbacks guessing, he will be a weapon. But I don't think I can see him being an every down guy. Brian said he's been at a number of schools. He'll be 25 on draft day. So like there is part of me that thinks, can he add weight? Because like I say, the frame's quite skinny. But it's not like he's like 20 or 21 where you think he'll naturally fill out. He's going to be 25. Like if it was going to fill out, you'd think it would have happened by now. So he is probably always going to be an undersized edge. It just comes down to kind of where you value that. To me, he's kind of late day 2, just because I think he is good enough of a pass rusher that I think there's value in that. But I wouldn't take him. I've seen some people talk about him kind of, top 50. I'm not there on him personally.
Okay, and then the last player we're covering today, and theoretically the star of the show, is Max Llewellyn from Iowa, 6'5", 263. Jack, what did you think?
Yeah, I liked him. I have him just ahead of height in my. He is my top graded player of the ones we discussed today. So verified measurables on him: 6'5" and 1/8", 260, 32 3/4 inch arms. So the arms are a little bit shorter than you'd like, but not miles off. Been productive this year: 38 pressures, including 6 sacks and 9 hits. He's twitchy. Especially for a guy kind of 260, you see him set guys up. He'll wrong foot tackles. He has a nice, really nice spin move that he uses. I've seen people comparing him in terms of the way he attacks, to Aiden Hutchinson, and you do see that in terms of the way he uses the inside spin. He's not on kind of Hutchinson's caliber, but definitely stylistically some similarities. Loves to win on the inside. I think he's got enough burst to threaten the edge with speed, and he understands how to set guys up. So I think if you're trying to sell yourself on Llewellyn, for me, it's the pass rush. He's smart, he's quick, he's twitchy, and he has good size. So you can see that being, as much as that is his specialty at the moment, he's got the size to make you think he can transition into a more thorough every down role than a guy like Height would. He's not got the greatest power as a pass rusher. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not really a big part of his game, especially again for his size. Like I said, the twitch is good for his size, but equally you would expect more in terms of power at 260. He does play tall. He is obviously 6'5", and you do see that at times where he can, especially against the run, kind of get upright out of his stance and then just kind of struggle to anchor as a result. Obviously, length limitations, that will have him off some teams' board. I don't think it's prohibitive, given how he wins and the fact he's shown he can kind of be a successful pass rusher. Bend is fine. Not great, but it's fine. But you do see him against more athletic tackles. They will kind of match him and carry him around the arc. So I think he is a good pass rusher, serviceable run defender. For me, he is kind of in that, late day 2 range, probably 3rd round range for me.
Okay, Brian, what do you have on Max Llewellyn, the edge from Iowa?
And this is the guy we're gonna kind of disagree with probably the most for this group. Obviously, some stuff we agree about, but anyway, the one more interesting note from him, or along Llewellyn, I should say, is on his official measurements, we have his hand size. He has 8 3/4 inch hands, so his hands are on the small side, especially for a guy that big. I think at times that does show up on film. His grip strength, I think, can be a little bit lacking at times. And this is his first and only year as a starter. Again, that's kind of just a weird Iowa thing. He probably, if he was anywhere else, he probably would have started last year too. But anyway, he gets moved around, or they move around. Sorry, we restate that. That sounds weird. They do move around a lot. They even play him sometimes at 5 tech. He'll use his length to try and get separation from blockers. He definitely gives effort to chase down plays on the sideline. I feel like his speed is kind of average-ish, maybe slightly below average. Can hold up in the run game and disengage, but it's a bit inconsistent. He'll get rooted out at times by fullbacks and tight ends and then just push out of his gap. His base can also get thin at times and gets pushed from the side from slanting offensive linemen. He does have a nice arm over, though. I think if he has some more moves to it, I think he can string some moves with that, and something that could be something he could go with. He will pair an inside fake with a swim, so that's obviously nice stringing there with 2 moves together there. I felt like it's kind of weird. His explosiveness off the snap was kind of inconsistent, so I'm not sure if it's he's timing the snap weird, or it's the only thing I can think of, because at least from a physical standpoint, no, it's not. You can't say someone is explosive sometimes and not all the times. So I don't know if he's mistiming the snap or what. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but that's what I'm guessing. But he comes off the snap with a good low pad level. He'll make some plays just on hustle alone, because he's partially kind of your typical Iowa defensive player. And again, kind of like I said, with the grip strength, sometimes he's had players slip out of his grip and get away from him. But kind of like Jack brought up, his spin move was kind of nice. It shows some potential. I think it still could be a little bit better, but I think that could be potentially a kind of a quote unquote go-to move. Spacing was a little off on it and stuff like that. But he does show some pop and power to his hands, but again, it can be inconsistent, I think, again, because of his hand size and his grip strength's not great. But he can be a little bit stiff when changing direction from going side to side. So it can kind of like what Jack said, he's not really that bendy. Not super stiff, but not really that bendy either. Kind of like average-ish, maybe slightly below average. And it's also weird to notice when sometimes he's chasing plays from the backside, he's like almost running straight up. So I think his pad level could be a little bit better at times. He's a decent athlete, gives a lot of effort. He plays physical. His pass rush skills aren't completely developed yet. I think they still need some more work. I think it's partially just because it won't be a 1-year starter. But I feel like his play against the run is not kind of up to your typical Iowa defensive lineman standards. I think it could be a lot better. I feel like the ceiling with him is a little bit limited, but there's still some room there to grow, of course, improve his pass rusher. I think he can be a rotational edge rusher. I have an early to mid day 3 pick on him.
Okay. So we got a late start today based upon me not knowing how to operate a computer 12 hours after I come home from vacation. So I appreciate Brian and Jack hanging with the podcast to make this happen. Jack, do you want to let everybody know about all of the other football content and the other football podcasts that you have?
Yeah. So you can find all my work on Twitter. Handle is there. all my written work is over at The Touchdown, which is the UK's biggest NFL site, where I head up all the NFL draft content. I'll be doing a draft guide again this year, which I've just started working on. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But that's going to be a while in the pipeline. And then I'll be here on Sundays talking defensive line. So that's me.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, kind of same stuff as usual. Just see my handle right there, BMAAFI NFL. Again, you can always find me on Twitter there, just posting clips and talking about prospects. Every now and then I'll get some little insider information or something. I'll try and put it out there if I can. But what was it called? Yeah, there, basically Twitter, just posting stuff like that. And then I got my Substack. I've kind of fallen off on it because it's been busy lately, so I haven't really been able to write anything lately. But I'm trying. And then, of course, I usually write for the Cheesehead TV Draft Guide. If you're a Packers fan, I'll be writing that stuff until March. Sorry, I was trying to think of the date. And that's about it. And of course, here every Sunday.
Yeah. So, Anthony, we had a brief private chat, and we don't have anything on those two Miami players right now. So, more than likely, they are not in this draft class, and that's probably why they're a little bit off of our radar.
Yep.
I want to give a special thanks to Jack and Brian, not just for their patience with me this morning. Just getting StreamYard to work apparently was a chore in and of itself, coming back from a long Thanksgiving break. We're here every day, and next Sunday is a pretty good group. You guys might know of some of these defensive linemen. Next week, Jack and Brian are going to be covering Ruben Bain, Keldrick Falk. Now I got to get the whole list in front of me before I forget it all. So specifically, it is Mikael Kamara from Indiana, Ruben Bain from Miami, TJ Parker from Clemson, Keldrick Falk from Auburn, Amari Washington from Oregon, Dante Corleone from Cincinnati, LT Overton from Alabama, and Peter Woods from Clemson. And that will be the last defensive line podcast that we will have on Sunday morning. The week after will be a defensive tackle big board. The week after, an edge big board. So you can see how Brian and Jack have kind of stacked the different players that they've evaluated. And they may even have players on their board that we haven't podcasted on. So that'll be can't miss podcasting. And then starting in January, this time slot will likely be Jack Rentnall with Devin Jackson covering the draft the way that those two decide to cover the draft. And then Brian will be sliding to a different Sunday podcast. So we will continue to have daily draft coverage, but some of the people coming on the podcast in January will be a little bit different. So for the 110 people at the Draft Professor, thank you so much for watching. For Jack Rentnall, Brian Maffey, myself, thank you so much, and we will see you on a podcast again in about 3 minutes. Thank you, everybody.